Hi, everyone. This is Amanda, and you're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of, but you should have. And you're probably noticing that I'm speaking to you, and that is because I am mostly recovered from COVID. I have been sick for a very long time. We're working on almost an entire month now, and I just have some residual COVID stuff happening, but we are still unable to record at this time. COVID is still affecting us, so we definitely want to take another week off, but we're hoping that next week we will have a brand new episode. But in the interim, we are continuing to highlight Indigenous folks that we've talked about on the podcast, and this is a perfect week to do that, as it is Thanksgiving. So I hope that you take some time to revisit these incredible Indigenous women who have been incredible leaders for their communities. Enjoy. All right, lay it on me. Who you got?
All right, so the lady that I'm going to be talking about today is Freda Dicing.
No, I don't know her.
She's a master carver, painter, tireless educator, and a champion of First Nations art and culture.
Ooh, this is exciting.
Never heard of this lady. And so, like I had mentioned before, it was really hard to find a lot of information on Freda. It's usually fairly easy. We've mentioned this before, to find information of their accomplishments, but it's like, where did they grow up? Or, they don't have those little things that I feel like turn these women into somebody maybe we can picture. So I did my best. And I really liked her. The stuff that I did find out about her was really cool. So Freda was born in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, in 1925.
Oh my gosh, it's so weird when
I
we
know.
have like the corresponding time.
As soon as you said that, I was like, oh my God, our ladies are alive at the same time.
Weird.
And she was a member of the Sadsuganalanis clan. I might have to go back and figure out how to pronounce that. I even went to like Google how to pronounce. I was like, how to pronounce in this language, and we'll get a little bit further into this, but this clan and this culture, their language is being lost.
Oh.
So finding out how to pronounce it was
almost
impossible.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, no disrespect. I know I'm probably saying it wrong, and I acknowledge that. This clan is a branch of two First Nations of the Haida Indians. Haidas are the indigenous people of the Pacific Northwest coast. Their homelands are the islands near the coast of southeastern Alaska and northwest British Columbia. The word Haida in their language means person, which I thought was very it's nice. You're just a person.
I'm just a person. That's Tig Notaro's tagline. I'm just a person.
Really?
Yeah, you know who she
Love
is, right?
Tig. Yes.
Yeah, she's going to be here, this Saturday.
I do.
I'm going.
So the two separate Haida communities are called Maset and Skidigat. She had a Haida mother and a Swedish father who died when she was 2 years old. Her mother, whose name was Flossie, remarried and moved the family to a 10-acre area of bushland near Terrace in British Columbia. When her mother remarried, she was only 4 years old, so she didn't really have too much of a memory of her father.
Yeah, of being like a parentless child.
Exactly. So Freda's family grew up really simple. I mean, 10 acres of bushland. And they were cracking into this raw. Like she had a story of them just like clearing out brush and creating a home and this area where nothing was out there.
It's always impressive when people do stuff like that, but I also think they're a little bit crazy.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
I'm reading the memoir Educated right now by Tara Westover, and it's set in Idaho. And it's these people who do that in the 90s. And I'm like, no thanks.
So Freda's family grew up really simple, and she recalled wearing dresses made from bleached flour sacks. And when she got her first store-bought dress, she remembers was for her 11th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah. And I love the flour sack dresses because my mom used to have flour sack dresses because they used to come with this cloth that was printed with really pretty flowers. And it wasn't just a plain white, know nothing piece of cloth. And my mom actually still has an apron that her mother made her from little scrap pieces of flour sack, which
That's really
it
cool.
is really
That kind
cool.
of like family history is really neat.
Yeah. She said she was 12 years old when she first attempted to carve. She enjoyed carving, but her heart really was in painting instead. So she ended up studying and painting at the Vancouver School of Art, after which she developed an interest in her Haida heritage. This
Mm.
spark lit. She spent a lot of time with her paternal grandmother, and she said that her grandmother contributed to her interest in learning about her past, her ancestral history,
Yeah, and her
basically,
cultural
her
traditions.
cultural
So
traditions.
was her mom not traditional at all?
It didn't really say.
She must not have been if she was probably a product of the boarding school system
Yeah.
where they were like beaten if they ever tried to do anything like
Yeah.
speak their
And
language.
that is like a story told over and over and over of taking these people and wiping out who they are so
Mm-hmm.
that they will assimilate.
Yes, colonialism.
Yes. And in that area where she was from, it was a coastal area where they were doing a lot of fur trading. That's like way back in the day. Of course, Alaskan fur traders were a
Yeah.
big part of that. And so there was a lot of that colonialization because it was a
Yeah.
port to
Mm-hmm.
bring in all these furs and trade and things like that.
And white people like to make money. They're greedy.
Yes. So she said this spark to get into her Haida heritage also was lit when she saw an exhibition of Native art at the Vancouver Art Gallery called People of the Potlatch
Mm.
and a piece of work called Arts of the Raven. Frida realized the loss of her culture around her. Not only were these ancient practices of like drawing, painting, carving, weaving, jewelry making, that they were starting to dwindle, but that their own language was being lost. People were not speaking it anymore.
Mm.
Carving was a tangible connection between her people and their land, and she felt it was vital to continue the practice to keep the connection between her people's history throughout the generations. I mean, this is what they did, and they were
Yeah.
big, like canoe makers and totem poles and these beautiful, time consuming pieces of art that they would do as a community. You know, they would sit together and they would carve this as, one kind of
Yeah.
thing. So she was accepted as one of the first students at a new school called the Gitanma School of Northwest Coast Indian Art in Hazleton, BC. Once
Hmm.
again, I apologize if I pronounce that wrong, in the Gitsan territory.
I'm already so in love with this woman.
There she received instruction from an art historian, Bill Holm, and began learning and working with First Nation artists Tony Hurt and Robert Davidson. She began her carving career at the start of when she was in her early 40s. That's when she was
Whoa.
like, I think this is important. Like for her, she was a wonderful painter, she was a wonderful artist, but she felt like carving was what connected all of the different tribes, because like how I said there were two branches,
Yeah.
and all of these branches broke off to clans, and all the clans broke off to villages, and so all these people had all these different little separations, but it all led back to that one piece, and a lot of it was their artwork. Like they all kind of had the same traditions. So with this small handful, and I mean small handful of indigenous artists, they were responsible for the reawakening of the Northwest Coast arts and culture. And they called it their Renaissance.
Wow. It's like the Harlem Renaissance.
Yes. And so she worked with other master artists as one of the first female carvers on the modern Northwest Coast. Some of the work she created were ceremonial masks. If you've ever seen the wooden masks, and they'll use like a little bit of twigs and leaves and things to create hair. And I'll include later too some images of the artwork. I feel like when you go to in Washington, when you go to Seattle, there's a lot of Alaskan artwork
Yeah.
that you can see, similar to like that very line form art of whales and eagles and
Yeah, the Pacific Northwest, so I didn't grow up here. So that all of that tribal art and tribal iconography is all new to me
oh, I
relatively.
keep forgetting that you're not from here.
Yeah, I'm from Montana and so our iconography is based on buffalo, hills, mountains, lots of like beading
Mm-hmm.
and really just elaborate dresses and stuff like that. So totally different.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
the native coastal art is very connected to the landscape of the coast. So the
yeah,
birds, the
the
fish, the
whales, the
whales.
salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the work she created the ceremonial masks and totem poles, which often depicted in her work female forms and figures, which was very original and unique representation of Northwest Coast folklore. It hadn't really been done.
Represent.
She also created textile works, which included blankets, robes, incorporating traditional First Nation forms and designs. She explored silkscreen printing, and was later commissioned to do a wall mural for the Prince Rupert General Hospital back in BC, where she was born, which is really
Mm.
cool. In 1980, her work was recognized and included in the groundbreaking exhibition titled Legacy: Tradition and Innovation in Northwest Coast Indian Art. And this was assembled by the Royal British Columbia Museum, and it was to be exhibited internationally, which was a big, huge step in her career because not only was she doing it in the US, it was going to see the world, which
Wow.
I think is fantastic.
And
Uh,
what year was that again?
this was in 1980.
Okay, so by now she's in her 60s
Yep.
or almost, I guess.
So the goal for the exhibition was to bring awareness and appreciation of their culture and their art and their history. Frida focused on her Haida heritage throughout her whole art career, and she started teaching and sharing her knowledge and techniques. She would teach at seminars, she would teach in classrooms, and her biggest goal was to push young First Nation artists to connect with their heritage and create art the way their people had been doing for generations.
I love that.
Right?
She's like single-handedly trying to bring back an entire
Saving.
cultural
Yes.
tradition.
So she also went to serve as an artist in residence. I had to look that up. I was like, what is an artist in residence? And so basically you're invited to reside in like
A place.
a place, and then you're there sharing the specific artwork that you do. So you're teaching as well. So she ended up going to the Dominican Republic.
Oh, interesting.
Very. And then she also went on to participate in a sculpture symposia in Finland. So she got to get out of her little coastal
Yeah.
town, which was cool.
I have a really good friend who's a Cherokee artist who's an artist. She has a standing artist in residence position at Yellowstone every summer,
Oh,
which is, I think, really amazing.
that would be awesome.
Yeah. Her name is DG House. You can look her up online, guys.
So, friend and student Dempsey Bob described her as giving and sharing. She was non judgmental and she had a very gentle teaching style. So, here's a clip of Dempsey Bob talking about her. So, Frida would go on to receive many honors and awards. She was recognized by the National Aboriginal Achievement Foundation, and this foundation is now called Indspire. So, it's like a play on the word.
Indigenous, yeah.
Yes, exactly. Who awarded her with a National Aboriginal Achievement Award in Winnipeg in March of 2002. That same year, she also received an honorary doctorate from the University of Northern British Columbia in May 2002.
So she's like 80.
Yeah. 77.
Wow.
So sadly, this same year, Frida was tragically killed.
Oh,
She was
shit.
involved in a single vehicle accident. She was apparently alone in her pickup truck and lost control on an icy road and crashed and died.
Oh, no.
So in 2006, in her honor and to continue her legacy, uh, Dempsey Bob and I believe one of the other people that she had taught and a couple of Dempsey Bob's family members put together, raised money, and started a school called the Northwest Community College. And they created the Freda Dysing School of Northwest Coast Art. It's located in Terrace, British Columbia, and named in her honor.
That's really beautiful that they
So,
would pull that together for her.
instructor Ken McNeil says this about the school.
Oh, I like that.
And so at this school, there's a lot of people that Frida had taught and people that knew Frida.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are continuing to teach her style and her technique of what she learned.
Oh,
And the school, there, in the video that I'm going to give you the link to, the school is beautiful. It's amazing. And they offer like a fine arts degree, and they have like elevated degrees. And like in the video, the people that are in there are such young indigenous people. I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like they're just really connecting to who they are as people and what they can turn around and do with that. It's like the sky is limitless. I was watching this and I was crying today. I got a little emotional because there's been so much taken from so many people,
yeah.
and especially Native people. It's not fair. And just like that instructor said, if you don't have your culture, especially for people of color
Yeah.
and indigenous people, you lose your identity. You don't know
Totally.
who you are. And I know what that feels like. And I'm just so glad that her influence is able to piece that back together for them.
Yeah.
So there was a student that was interviewed, and we'll include this clip as well. Jamie Davis says this of the program based on Frida's teachings.
Mm.
Yes. And I want to include a little side note that I love. The Haida people have kind of a more like an Americanized name, and then they have their own like name given to them by their clan. And the Haida name that she got to have was Skil Kuwat, which means magical little woman. I
That's
love
so
that.
sweet.
And I love that too, when her former student said that she was non-judgmental,
Yeah.
because
I
I, as a student, used to get very frustrated, and the teachers that would not, be like, well, just get it right, or just do this, or like kind of cut you off, the ones that were a little more gentle were the ones that still stick in my head. Like I still remember those teachers' names. I still remember their faces, and I still remember moments where they were very gentle with me and it was necessary.
yeah, I wanted to come back to that after you played that clip just to be like, that is the kind of teacher I wish or aspire to be,
Mm-hmm.
because it's really hard to be that way. It's just difficult to like slow down and just let them work their way through it and hold their hand, but not necessarily show them how to write.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I thought that was really cool and admirable of her as a teacher.
Well, especially if you don't process your frustrations properly. Like, what if those people put those tools down? Like,
Mhm.
who are the
Who's
other
going to pick them
people?
back up?
Yeah, and who's going to lose out on the art that you might have created and contributed to the world?
I wanted to mention a podcast because we're talking about this indigenous artist. And this woman's not an artist, but there's a woman named Rebecca Nagel, and she is a Cherokee woman who has a podcast called This Land, which is really, really good. And it's all about indigenous land in the United States
Mm.
and how there's a Supreme Court case right now that's going to be heard in the next session that could potentially change everything we know about Indigenous land and reservation systems in the country for the worse for Indigenous people.
Oh, no.
So you should totally listen to it. It starts out with a murder. So if you're into true crime, you can start there and then learn a lot about Cherokee land, Cherokee culture. And she specifically is trying really hard to learn the Cherokee language because same issue. It's in, I think it's like she said on her podcast, I think it was in like 2 generations or 3, or in like not even that. I think it was in like 20 or 30 years. There'll be no people left who are fluent.
Wow.
And it is very difficult to maintain traditions and cultures when you don't know the words to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a guy on there on her podcast who was talking about how he, like, there are certain words for phrases and stuff that he will say that there is no equivalent in English.
That is the same with the Haida people.
Yeah.
Like they were saying there's no way we can translate this for you. This is a word that is ours and we can't translate it. There's no English other side of it.
Yeah, it's not like a 1-to-1 translation. It's not like flowers, flora, you know?
Right.
You know, it's totally different. It's a whole concept that does not exist in English frame of, like, an English language, but also because it doesn't exist in a frame of mind.
And the Haida people are really fascinating because there's so, like I said, the branches break off and then it breaks into clans and villages and different tribes. And so all of these people that are creating this artwork and in sharing this space, they'll be like, I'm from this clan over here and I'm from this clan. And they're bringing different images that represent their own families and creating artwork from that together, which is really cool. It's not just one blanket thing. There's just not just coastal natives and that's all that they are. And I think a lot
There's
of people...
diversity amongst a tribe. Yeah.
Exactly. And I wish people would see that a little bit more. It gets me and my husband riled up because they'll be like, isn't your husband Mexican? And I'm like, no, I'm Mexican. My husband's Spanish. And they're like, what's the difference?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, the fucking ocean.
Continents. Entire colonial histories.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned that, and that was something that was always really irritating to me. It was called Pan-Indian. It's this Pan-Indian image, and it, like, Hollywood is the worst. Everybody is a Plains Indian. And they all look one way, and they all sound one way. They all the same. Way. They all have teepees. They all, hunt buffalo. And it's like, guys, that was like the middle of the what is now the country. And then on the coasts and in other areas, we're completely different. It's like, it's just crazy to me.
Look it up. Well, let me share where I got my information. So I went to spiritwrestler.com. I went to, the college that has this course offered with Freda's teachings is www.Coast Mountain College. They have a wonderful website, and also they have like everything that you need there. You can look into the programs, you can look at the artwork, you can see the teachers that are there. It was really just fun and fascinating to go through. I was like, I want to go to this school. And then www.bigoran.com.
She's going to throw that www in there in case you're not familiar.
It's
World Wide Web.
Leave me alone. God damn it.
I gotta like poke you a little. www.
Revolvi.com. And I took a little bit from Wikipedia. There wasn't a whole lot on there about her.
Yeah.
There is a book that was written about her. I kept seeing a cover and it had her name on it, but it wouldn't say who the author was. It wouldn't say where I could find it. They were just like taken from this book about Freda Dysing's life. I'm like, I can't, so I'm not going to even, I don't know if that book exists.
It's a phantom book.
Yeah. All right. Who do you have?
Are you ready, madame?
Ready.
I'm going to tell you the story of Elizabeth Peratrovich.
I don't know her.
I didn't think so. She was a civil rights activist who was central in the passage of the very first anti-discrimination law in U.S. history.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
You ready for this?
I'm ready.
Okay, Elizabeth Wanamaker was born on July 4th, 1911, in Petersburg, Alaska. She was a member of the Coho Salmon clan, which is part of the Raven moiety of the Tlingit Nation. There wasn't actually like written in Tlingit was her clan name, and I was like, I'm never going to be able to pronounce that, and I
yeah.
apologize, but it means Coho Salmon.
Okay.
She was the daughter of a native woman and her mother's Irish brother-in-law.
What?
Yeah.
So
that means that her mom had an affair with her sister's husband.
Oh, jeez.
And the two of them abandoned Elizabeth, and she was left in the care of the Salvation Army.
Oh, we haven't had any abandoned kids in a while, so.
Let's start out with a heartwarming story of abandonment. Elizabeth was then adopted by Andrew Wanamaker and his wife Jean, both of whom were members of the Tlingit tribe. Her adoptive father, Andrew, was a fisherman and a Presbyterian minister, and her mother was a basket weaver and a homemaker. Elizabeth grew up speaking both Tlingit and English. They primarily lived in Sitka, though they moved to Claywalk when she was 10. Claywalk was a native village on the Prince of Wales Island. Her family was really poor, especially living in Claywalk. There's not a lot going on there. And the options for education were super limited. But this was not how it always was for Alaska Natives. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Alaska as a territory prior to the U.S. involvement, because it's really important, I think, to draw a distinction between how life was before and after U.S. involvement, much like Hawaii was. Prior to Elizabeth's birth, Alaska had been a Russian territory, often called Russian America. The Russians had established a trade that reached far and wide and established the first seaport city known today as Sitka. The Russians seemingly mingled well with the indigenous communities and worked together with them and not against them. Most Alaska Natives could read and write in 2 or more languages.
Wow.
Tlingit, Russian, and English were the most common. The Russians relied heavily on the local indigenous folks' knowledge, talents, and expertise, and natives often held important positions in Russian trade operations. Russia ceded the territory of Alaska to the U.S. on March 30th, 1867 for $7.5 million in gold. That's not really dollars, $7.5 million in gold. The treaty said this is where things get shitty.
Okay.
So in order for Russia to sign this treaty, they assigned away this part. All inhabitants who did not reserve their natural allegiance to Russia, with the exception of members of uncivilized native tribes, were admitted to the enjoyment of all rights, advantages, and immunities of citizens of the U.S. This meant that the U.S. didn't recognize Alaska Natives as citizens or even as equal human beings.
Whoa.
Yeah. So they were like, if you don't owe an allegiance to Russia, like if you're not a Russian person,
Yeah.
you are allowed to be a citizen unless you're native.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty severe.
It was their fucking land.
Yeah.
So the U.S. saw the natives as quote unquote uncivilized.
Oh my God.
Yeah. As white Americans moved into Alaska, segregation then became the law of the land. Natives were not allowed access to public accommodations, including restaurants, beauty parlors, movie theaters, and of course, schools. One story, which took place just 6 years before Elizabeth was born, was particularly telling of what it was like at the time. A young Aleut girl living in Sitka wanted to attend the white public school because she was interested in playing music. She was half white, and they were a Christian family, which was apparently that was how you decided whether or not you were considered a U.S. citizen. You had to be Christian, like full-on Christian, and you also were supposed to be like part white.
Okay.
So she was like, she petitioned the judge saying, like, I fit these qualifications. Can you please let me attend public school? And the judge denied her citizenship because, quote, she was not sufficiently civilized because she attended a fish camp every summer with her Aleut grandmother.
Wow.
That's all it took to be uncivilized.
Uncivilized?
Was to participate in anything that had to do with Native traditions.
Wow.
The differences between the Russian occupation of Alaska Territory and the U.S. was stark. Samuel C. Davis, a Haida man, wrote this in a news article in 1923. Why was it If Russia owned Alaska, she made no laws to rule Alaska by. The only laws that I never ever knew was the Tlingit and Haida laws. But now a great shadow hangs over the Tlingit and Haidas in this great land of Alaska. It's the shadow of the white men's greed.
Wow.
Russia never came and took our streams and trapping grounds from us. They never told us how we might catch salmon and when we might stop. And if we wanted a stick of timber, Russia never gave us permits. Those were the days when we were free. There were no judges to take our canoes from us. There was no thou shalt not in Alaska in those days.
That is extremely powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And the Haida people, that's Freda dicing.
Yes, I thought that was right.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say that earlier, and then I was like, maybe I'm wrong about that.
Mm-mm.
So it's the Tlingit, Aleuts, Haida. Those are all like the main Inupiaq. This kind of discrimination also bled into the criminal justice system, where whites were often allowed to walk free for extreme violence, even murder against Native folks. But Native folks were jailed for the slightest offenses, sometimes that were based entirely on a white person's narrative.
Oh my gosh.
Doesn't that sound an awful lot like Jim Crow South?
Yes, absolutely.
So in 1912, a group of progressive Native folks formed the Alaska Native Brotherhood. They were made up of young men who were educated and who were setting out to challenge the discriminatory practices. A founding member of the organization was none other than Elizabeth's father, Andrew Wanamaker. Just 3 years later, the Alaska Native Sisterhood was formed, which was a group of women working alongside the Alaska Native Brotherhood. In 1924, due in part to the efforts of the ANS and ANB, the U.S. Congress granted American citizenship to all Native Americans, which, by the way, 1924, that's way too late.
Yeah.
But so they say, okay, all Native folks are U.S. citizens. However, in practice, this was far from reality. Segregationist policies still ruled the Alaska Territory where Elizabeth and her family lived. So Elizabeth attended Native elementary schools when she was young because she was barred from attending white elementary schools. However, she was able to attend a public high school in Ketchikan, which was 70 miles east of Clayoquot. So she had to travel 70 miles every day to and from to go to school.
My God.
That school had been integrated just a few years prior after a Tlingit leader had sued the school board and won.
Wow.
Which was super rare. Elizabeth went on to go to college at Sheldon Jackson College in Sitka and then pursued further education at the Western College of Education in Bellingham, Washington, which is now part of Western Washington University. Such a beautiful school. While in college, Elizabeth met Roy Peratrovich. The two married in 1939 when she was 20 years old. He was also Tlingit, of mixed Native and Serbian descent.
Oh.
Which was pretty common.
Yeah.
Because the Russians had been living there.
Okay, this makes sense because when I heard her last night, I was like, what?
Yeah, it sounds pretty Russian. The two decided to move back to Alaska together, and they settled in Quelac, which is that Native village that she had grown up in. He actually had grown up there too. So I had conflicting reports about when they met. Mm-hmm. One said they met in college when they were both attending college in Bellingham. But other parts said they went to high school together in Ketchikan.
Oh,
and that they knew each other through that. So I don't know where it was they actually met, but eventually they married and they moved back to Quelac. Roy worked in a cannery. Then he enrolled and became a police officer, a chief clerk, and the postmaster.
Wow.
Then Roy ran for and was elected to mayor in Quelac and served 4 terms.
He was the mayor? Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. However, Quelac was a small town, and the couple wanted more opportunities for work and also for their children. And they also had their eye on a larger role in the political scene. So by now, they've been married for 10 years, and the couple has 3 kids. They have 1 daughter named Loretta and 2 sons, Frank Allen and Roy Jr. The couple decided to move to Juneau, which was a booming metropolis, in 1941. They assumed Juneau would provide a lot of advantages for their family. It was a large city, it had nice homes, it had all the conveniences of being a city, and it had a really great public school system. Mm-hmm. Juneau was the capital, obviously.
Yeah.
When they arrived, the family immediately faced discrimination. The Petratroviches found a home in a nice neighborhood where they envisioned their kids playing and making friends with neighbors, going to school, living a nice life. The owners of the rental home were willing to lease the property to them until they discovered they were, quote, Indian. No longer were they allowed to rent the home.
Wow, that's discrimination.
Yeah, no shit. It is thought that this affront to her children, to their future as citizens, was the catalyst for Elizabeth to begin pushing for an end to discriminatory laws. She started first with pushing her husband more into the public eye. Elizabeth said to him, "This is your home and your people. Why don't you go out and help them?"
Wow.
And Roy actually said this about Elizabeth: "She was the manager. She saw the possibilities. She never once stepped out in front, but made it look like I made my own way."
At least he gave her the cred, man. That's
Me,
awesome.
that's what I thought. I was like, at least he admits that he was, that whole saying, like, behind every great man is a great woman or whatever. Yeah, no, he's letting everybody know. Roy became involved with the Alaska Native Brotherhood, which was the big organization that her father had helped found, eventually rising to become the Grand Camp president. Elizabeth followed in Roy's footsteps, and she joined the Alaska Native Sisterhood, where she became the vice president. The two of them were a force to be reckoned with.
I can imagine.
They were both really active and incredibly intelligent people. Like, they'd both been to college, they spoke multiple languages, they were super motivated and passionate about what they were doing. So they petitioned the Daily Alaska Empire, which was the largest newspaper in the Alaska Territory at the time, to formally object to the paper's practice of publishing the names and ages of Native children as front page news whenever they were in trouble with the police.
Oh my gosh.
They,
Call out.
they did not have a policy of doing this to white children.
Oh my God. Okay.
Right?
Okay.
It's an infuriating story, but very, like, she's awesome. So this wasn't nearly enough, right? Just challenging a paper. There were signs all over Alaska that declared natives to be second-class citizens. Signs outside of businesses declared things like "no natives allowed" or "for whites only," and the worst of all, "no natives or dogs allowed."
Oh, jeez.
The Nazis did that all the time throughout, like, Germany.
Yeah.
No Jews or dogs allowed. The discrimination was so widespread that even whites were caught up in it. If someone so much as saw them with an Alaska Native. So there was this woman named Henrietta Newton who was actually friends with Elizabeth. Henrietta had lived in Quaylock. She was the only white woman in the whole city, her whole town. So they knew each other. So Henrietta Newton was a teacher who married a Tlingit man. And she decided one day to stop into a beauty shop and make an appointment. Later that day, the shop owner saw her walking down the street with her native sister-in-law and 2 children. When Mrs. Newton arrived for her appointment the next day at the shop, the owner told her, "We don't cater to Indian trade." After Mrs. Newton informed her that she was 100% Swiss, the owner backed down, but Mrs. Newton said, "I wouldn't take her perm if she gave it to me for free."
Exactly. That's why you don't support places like that.
The owner followed her out and apologized, but Mrs. Newton wouldn't hear it. By this point, World War II was in full swing, and many Native men turned out to fight for the United States during World War II. When the Peratrovitches saw a sign in the Douglas Inn window that said, "No natives allowed," they immediately sat down to pen a letter to Ernest Gruning.
Grown.
He's got a weird name.
Okay.
He was then the governor of the Alaska Territory. And they wrote this: "The proprietor of Douglas Inn does not seem to realize that our native boys are just as willing as the white boys to lay down their lives to protect the freedom that he enjoys." The governor agreed. And he decided to join forces with the Peratrovitches. Gruning began meeting with individual owners of businesses, trying to persuade them to take down their signs, but his efforts were futile. And he was most upset by the blatant discrimination of Native soldiers and their friends and family at places like the USO clubs and other facilities. Like, they finally allowed Native soldiers to go into the USO clubs, but, like, if a sister of a soldier was there, they would kick her out.
Wow.
For being Native. One of the biggest hurdles Elizabeth, the Native Sisterhood, and the Native Brotherhood and Governor Gruning faced was that the legislature in Alaska only met every other odd year and for only 60 days at a time.
Every other?
Every other odd year.
Whoa. Okay.
To get anything done would obviously take years.
Yeah.
But Elizabeth was up for the challenge. She gathered 5 young ladies to lobby a senator who was against the anti-discrimination movement. All of the women that she gathered together were well-educated, stylish, and they came across as sophisticated and proper ladies. And so they told this senator, his name was Frank Whaley, they told him personal stories of their own actual experiences of being discriminated against, not being allowed in or being kicked out of places. The senator just couldn't believe that such good-looking women were being kicked out of establishments.
I guess if you got it, use it. Yeah.
Well, like they were presenting themselves as we look like ladies.
Yeah.
And you look at us and you see fine ladies and we are those things.
Yeah.
We're still being kicked out.
Yeah. We're being dehumanized.
In addition to lobbying individual senators, Elizabeth and Roy, then leaders, they were the leaders of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Alaska Native Sisterhood. So they're both the leaders. They sat down with Governor Gruning and worked on drafting legislation to outlaw discrimination.
Wow.
Unfortunately, this first attempt failed after a bitter fight on the legislative floor. Roy said that this was his first lesson in double-cross politics because there are people who he had talked to personally who said that they would vote in favor of the law and then they didn't. They would not get another chance to fight for an anti-discrimination law for another 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, the Perattroviches traveled across the territory of Alaska, far and wide, appealing to Alaska Natives to turn out to vote in the next election and to get more Native Alaskans elected into office, which would increase their chances of passing an anti-discrimination law. Their campaign worked. Frank Peratrovich, Roy's brother, and Andrew Hope, a boat builder, were both Alaska Natives elected to seats in the legislature. So on a February afternoon in 1943, the legislature heard arguments for and against the proposed anti-discrimination law. The whole place was fucking packed to the gills. People were even standing on chairs in the back just to try to be able to see.
Jeez.
All of the members of the Alaska Native Brotherhood and the Alaska Native Sisterhood and a whole lot of other Native folks came out from the tribes to watch what was about to happen. Among the spectators was, of course, Elizabeth, styled to perfection, knitting.
Oh,
as she listened.
That's picturesque.
So the bill passed the House easily with little debate, and they knew that would happen. They had that one on lock. They knew that their real test was going to be in the Senate. So once it gets to the Senate, a heated 2-hour discussion begins. Senator Frank Whaley, the same man who years earlier they had lobbied and who said, "Oh, but you look like real ladies." Mm-hmm. He said that he didn't want, this is in his testimony in front of everybody. He says, "I don't want to sit next to an Eskimo in a theater because they smell."
Literally said that.
Literally said that.
Oh my God.
On the floor of the legislature in the Alaska Territory. Then Senator Tolbert Scott said this. He was speaking about how, like, really the problem is not natives and whites. The problem is what he called mixed breeds. Mixed breeds are
breeds.
Yeah, you ready? Mixed breeds are the source of the trouble. It is they only who wish to associate with the whites. Certainly, white women have done their part in keeping the races distinct. If white men had done as well, there would be no racial feeling in Alaska.
Wow. He's talking like it's almost like animal breeding or something. Like you could be talking about a pedigree of dogs.
That's right.
Disgusting.
And again, all of the Native folks in the gallery are listening to everything that this fucking asshole is saying.
Ugh.
So there are more and more of these kind of inflammatory comments. And all the while, Elizabeth is listening and knitting. Not showing us. She's just cool as a cucumber. Like nothing is showing on her face. I would be like red and spitting. I mean, I would not be able to handle it.
I would not be able to either.
So eventually, because he's the leader of the Alaska Native Brotherhood, Roy is asked to comment. Not her. After a number of questions, first grilling him on why he was qualified to speak to these men, which is patronizing enough.
Yeah.
He's finally able to plead his case. So he said, hey, the Democratic Party has already adopted anti-discrimination as their platform. So half of you in this place are Democrats. So you should automatically want to vote for it. Mm-hmm. And also, it has been none of you in here are denying that there's discrimination. So you're allowing the idea that discrimination is part of the law here. So he said, either you are for discrimination or you are against it accordingly as you vote on this bill. basically, the history will remember you based on this.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most vehement opponents of the law, the bill, the proposed law, was a man named Alan Shattuck, who said this. This one is rough. Who are these people, barely out of savagery, who want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind us?
Fuck! What makes you, what are you, fucking shit ice cream? Like, what the caucasity of it?
What? Who are these people barely out of savagery who want to associate with us whites with 5,000 years of recorded civilization? Oh, the incorrectness, the racism. It's just it's so frustrating.
Saturated. Ugh.
So after all of the men were heard, the Senate asked if this was par for the course in the legislature at the time. They asked if anyone else would like to voice their views. And this is when Elizabeth Peratrovich, then president of the Alaska Native Sisterhood, said she would like to speak.
What'd she say?
Those who remember her today said that Elizabeth had a presence about her. When she walked in a room or chose to speak, people shut the fuck up and listened. She commanded and demanded attention. So when she addressed the legislature, it was like a pin could drop. So in response to that vulgar declaration by Alan Shattuck, Elizabeth said this: I would not have expected that I, who am barely out of savagery, would have to remind gentlemen with 5,000 years of recorded civilization behind them of our Bill of Rights. I love that she took his words and just shot them down at them. Elizabeth went on, and she described the discrimination that she, her husband, and her children had faced when they arrived in Juneau. She talked about not being able to rent this house. She talked about not being able to go into establishments. And then she added this: there are 3 kinds of persons who practice discrimination. First, the politician who wants to maintain an inferior minority group so that he can always promise them something.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Second, the Mr. and Mrs. Jones who aren't quite sure of their social position and who are nice to you on one occasion and can't see you on others.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on who they're with.
Mm-hmm.
Third, the great Superman who believes in the superiority of the white race. And it's true.
It's true.
Number 2, that's that white moderate fucking King talked all about. Of course, Shattuck had a response for her, right? He couldn't let that go.
Oh, hell no.
Yeah.
How dare she?
Oh, and the guy who thinks he's so high and mighty and superior with his 5,000 years of recorded civilization. He asked if she thought that the bill would eliminate discrimination. Do you think this bill's going to eliminate discrimination? If we pass this, do you think that discrimination is just going to go away? Which was a deliberate attempt to get her to admit that laws don't change minds. Like, obviously, once you pass a law, that doesn't mean discrimination goes away. But she was on to him. She was like, I know what you're going to say. I got an answer
As
for
my
you.
grandma used to say, I got your number.
She said this: do your laws against larceny and even murder prevent those crimes? No law will eliminate crimes. But at least you as legislators can assert to the world that you recognize the evil of the present situation and speak your intent to help us overcome discrimination.
Holy shit, that is calling him out. It's like, no, motherfucker, it's not going to stop. But to recognize and have something in place where if you cross that line, it's not okay.
Yes. That's the whole fucking point, right? I get that argument a lot from students when we talk about guns. They're like, well, gun control laws aren't going to stop guns from being passed around. No, but it would sure fucking help because it would be against the law. And if you got caught, you would go to jail.
And people would stop maybe doing it because they don't want to go to jail.
Maybe. When Elizabeth finished, the entire place erupted in applause. Folks were cheering and shouting, and people were crying tears. The Daily Alaska Empire wrote that Elizabeth, quote, shamed the opposition into a defensive whisper. Just FYI, Roy and Elizabeth were the only 2 people who testified in favor of the bill.
Wow.
The Senate passed the bill 11-5 because she's a badass. And it was signed into law on February 16th, 1945. This was the first anti-discrimination law in the United States passed nearly 20 years before the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 14 years before Alaska was even a state.
Whoa.
Mm-hmm. That night, Roy and Elizabeth danced the night away at the Baranoff Hotel, a place that just a day before they could not go.
That's awesome.
So after this, Elizabeth advocated for the Red Cross, helping folks across the country and the world receive access to care. Which I was like, of course you did. In 1954, Roy Sr. accepted a position with the Federal Bureau of Indian Affairs and moved the family to Oklahoma. Just 2 years later, Elizabeth discovered that she had breast cancer.
Oh, no.
The family moved back to Alaska to be close to their families and tribes. Elizabeth died on December 1st, 1958, at the age of 47.
That's young.
Too young.
Really young.
She was buried beneath a Sitka spruce in Juneau's Evergreen Cemetery. In 1988, the Alaska legislature declared February 16th, the day that the Anti-Discrimination Act was signed, as Elizabeth Peratrovich Day. Elizabeth's husband Roy was looking forward to celebrating that first official Elizabeth Peratrovich Day, but he died a week prior.
Aww.
He was buried in the plot next to her in the Juneau Evergreen Cemetery. An award was established in her name by the Alaska Native Sisterhood, and the first winner was a woman named Carol Jorgensen, who created cross-cultural training curriculum for the Department of Fish and Game. And it turned out that Carol was Elizabeth's second cousin.
Oh, jeez.
One of the galleries in the Alaska State Legislature is now named the Elizabeth Peratrovich Gallery. In 2009, there was a documentary about her life, and it aired on PBS called For the Rights of All, Ending Jim Crow in Alaska. On February 16th, 2019, so February 16th was the day that anti-discrimination law was passed. So that was also the day, just this year, that a biography of hers was published called Fighter in Velvet Gloves, Alaska Civil Rights Hero Elizabeth Peratrovich. It was written by a woman named Annie Boochever. Yeah, Boochever.
Okay.
And just last week, on October 5th, 2019, the U.S. Mint chief announced that Elizabeth Peratrovich will appear on the tail side of the 2020 Native American dollar coin.
Ooh.
I'm going to get me one of those.
Yes.
I want to end with some information about what her children went on to do, because I found this really fascinating. Frank Allen Peratrovich followed in his parents' footsteps and worked in public service for his whole life. He was a U.S. Marine and then eventually the superintendent of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Frank Allen spent his entire life in Alaska, where he passed away in 2010. Loretta Marie Montgomery was a long-distance phone operator who married a man named Bob Montgomery in 1959. He was in the Air Force. They had lived in Germany and so-and-so, and they eventually lived in Seattle and then settled in Moses Lake, Washington.
Oh.
Which is just an hour away from us.
Yeah.
Where they raised their 4 children. She also died in 2010, which I was like, oh, that's a sucky year for you guys.
Yeah.
Roy Jr. went on to become the first Alaska Native to be registered as a professional civil engineer and started his own successful engineering firm called Peratrovich, Nottingham, and Drage, with offices in Anchorage, Juneau, and Seattle.
Cool.
In 1965, Roy designed the first original Brotherhood Bridge, honoring the Alaska Native Brotherhood that his grandfather co-founded. In 1999, Roy retired from engineering to pursue his love of art. He was also an artist.
Oh, that's cool.
He runs Ravenworks Art Studio in Gig Harbor, Washington.
Wow.
Roy also wrote a children's book in 2016 called Little Whale, based on a story about his grandfather.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
When I realized that 2 of her children lived in this state, I was like, I want to get in touch with this family, but I wasn't able to in time. So if you're listening to this and you're a descendant of Elizabeth Peratrovich, I want to hear from you, and I would love to record something and have your voice heard on our show. So my sources were Wikipedia and a really cool project called Alascool. And it's a project that was put on by Alaska Native educators who created this whole website honoring the history of Alaska Natives. And she was featured in the New York Times Overlooked Obituaries last year.
Yeah.
This actually in last March. So.
Oh, it's wonderful. Gosh. She sounded like a firecracker.
Yeah. And she looked so much like my grandmother.
Really?
It was shocking.
Whoa.
My grandmother I never met because she died when my mom was only 4 years old. But if I showed you the picture side by side, you'd be like, holy shit.
Whoa.
It was remarkable how much they look like each other. But she had just this beautiful regal look about her. She always had her hair coiffed in those like bouffant 40s hairdos, perfectly dressed, very nice clothes. Yeah,
Wow.
like there was other people who talked about like women who talked about like if you needed anything, you went to her. Like if you needed to figure out how to feed a large family on a small budget, she would tell you how to do it. If you needed to figure out some, like she even like taught a lot of Alaska Native women how to cook spaghetti.
Oh, wow.
Just like really random stuff I found on that Alaskool website that was really like personal and specific. But I was like, I'd love to include all of that, but we'd be here forever. So I loved her story.
I loved her story too. That was great. I'm glad we ended on a high note.
I am too, although I'm going to bring it down for just 1 second, but it's kind of a high note. So this morning I found out that a friend of mine died.
Oh.
I had known him for a long time. I knew him in college, and his name was Tony Little Owl. He was a really great, great, great guy. And everybody, if you went to Montana State University during the time between 2000 and 2007, you probably knew him at some point. And when I got there, he was just so welcoming and kind. He had been an RA and just was the kind of person that you could turn to if you needed anything.
Mm-hmm.
And his qualities were so well known and so profound that he was actually crowned homecoming king at the university.
Wow.
And he was the first Native American to ever become homecoming royalty at Montana State University.
Wow.
So he died a couple of days ago, and I just found out this morning, and I'm really sorry for his family and his friends, but I thought, I'm already talking about this incredible Native person. I should highlight my friend Tony, who in his own way had impacted a lot of lives.
That's awesome. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's what a week.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's start a new one.
Yeah. TikTok. Let's get there. Thank you everybody for listening today. And I know it was kind of a rough one, but I think we did it. We did it well. Good job.
I liked both of these stories. Yes.
Good job, Rita.
Air 5. Douche.
Did you say douche?
I went douche like if I am done. Okay, we are done.
Thank you everybody for listening, and thank you Lucas for your editing, and also to Jennifer Finch for providing our lovely theme music. We'll talk to you again next week.
All right, guys. Thanks for hanging in there. Till next time. That was a cheesy thumbs up.
You're welcome.